For 28 years. My father introduced me with a punchline that never felt like a joke, claiming I was too pretty to be his. But 6 weeks before my wedding, the laughter died. He slid a DNA consent form across the table and told me to prove I belonged, or he would not show up. I picked up the pen, knowing the results would not just expose a lie, they would burn his entire world to the ground. My name is Juliet Collins, and for 28 years, I have been the punchline to a joke that nobody actually found funny. It was always the same routine at country club mixers or holiday dinners. My father, Richard, would wrap an arm around my shoulder and embrace that felt more like a clamp and say to his business partners, "Doesn't she look lovely? Too pretty to be mine." "Obviously, must be the milkman's." The men would chuckle nervously, swirling their scotch, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or look away. I learned early on that the Collins genes are aggressive. My father has hair the color of midnight and eyes like wet asphalt. My brother, Evan, is his carbon copy dark, brooding, and sharp-jawed. My mother, Stephanie, shares that same deep brunette palette. And then there was me. I came out like a sunbeam in a coal mine, with spun gold hair and eyes the color of the Atlantic Ocean on a clear day, in a family that prided itself on looking like a cohesive, powerful unit. I was the glaring error code. I grew up thinking my appearance was a defect. I spent my teenage years dyeing my hair chestnut brown, trying to blend into the family portrait, but Richard would just scoff. "You can't paint over biology. Juliet," he would say, sipping his wine. "We all know what you are." He never hit me. He never raised a hand. He didn't have to. He just used that nickname, the affair child, until it stripped the skin right off my self-esteem. But tonight, the joke was over. We were sitting in the dining room of the estate in Briarcliff, Virginia. It was a room designed to intimidate, with high-vaulted ceilings and a chandelier that probably cost more than my entire college education. This was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. My wedding to Luke Carver was exactly 6 weeks away. The invitations were already printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock. The venue in Richmond was booked. The flowers were chosen. I looked across the mahogany table at my father. He was cutting into his steak with surgical precision. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that usually precedes a detonation. "So," Richard said, not looking up from his plate. "The wedding, it is getting close." "Yes, sir," Luke said. My fiancé was sitting next to me, his hand resting protectively on my knee under the table. Luke was a contractor, a man who built things with his hands, and he had never quite known how to handle the icy intellectual warfare of the Collins household. "We are really excited. Juliet has done an amazing job with the planning." Richard finally looked up. He dabbed the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin. "About that, I have been doing some thinking." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. That was the tone he used when he was about to veto a vacation or tell me he wouldn't co-sign a student loan. "I cannot, in good conscience, walk you down the aisle and give you away as a Collins," Richard said calmly, "unless I am certain you actually are one." The air left the room. Beside me, I felt Luke's body tense up, his muscles coiling like he was ready to flip the table. "Richard," my mother whispered. It was a weak, watery sound. Stephanie Collins sat at the other end of the table, looking like a woman who had been slowly erasing herself for 3 decades. She was wearing pearls that looked heavy enough to snap her neck. "Don't start." "Stephanie," Richard snapped, his eyes never leaving mine. "We have danced around this for 28 years. I have been patient. I have raised her. I have fed her. But if I am going to stand up in front of our friends, my business partners, and the entirety of Virginia society and claim her as my bloodline, I need proof." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to me. He slid it across the polished wood surface. It hissed as it moved, stopping right next to my water glass. I looked down. It was a consent form for a paternity test. "Clear helix genetics," Richard said. "I have already arranged for a technician to come by the house tomorrow morning. You provide the sample. I provide mine. We settle this before the wedding. If the results show you are mine, I pay for the wedding and I walk you down the aisle. If they show what I suspect, well, then at least we stop living a lie. And if I don't? I asked. My voice was steady, which surprised me. Inside, I was vibrating with a frequency of rage I hadn't known existed. Then I don't come, he said simply. No father of the bride, no funding, and everyone in that church will know exactly why I am not there. I will make sure of it. I looked around the table. My mother was staring at her salad as if she wished she could dissolve into the lettuce. She said nothing. She defended nothing. She had learned long ago that survival in this house meant making yourself small. And tonight, she was microscopic. This was the woman who had held me when I scraped my knees. Yet she couldn't find the voice to tell her husband that she hadn't cheated on him. Her silence was a louder condemnation than Richard's words. I looked at my brother. Evan was 26. The golden boy, the heir apparent. He had the dark Collins eyes, the job at Dad's firm, the trust fund I had never seen a dime of. He took a long drink of his wine, avoiding my gaze. Evan, I said softly. He set his glass down. Look, Jules, he said, his voice low. Just do it. Okay, just take the test so he shuts up about it. It is the only way to get some peace around here. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. That was the family motto. Let Richard slice you open. But don't you dare bleed on the carpet. Finally, I looked at my grandmother. Margot Sinclair was sitting to my right. She was my mother's mother, a woman of 80 with a spine made of steel rods and a mind that was still sharp as a tack. She was sipping her tea, her eyes fixed on Richard with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. But when her eyes shifted to me, the loathing vanished. She didn't look scared. She didn't look sad. She looked like she was waiting for a signal. My hand moved to the paper. I picked it up. The texture of the bond paper felt expensive. Even his insults were high quality. Luke started to stand up. This is insane. Richard, you are talking about your daughter. I am not going to sit here and let you... I put a hand on Luke's arm, stopping him. It is okay. Luke, I looked at Richard. He was smiling that smug, tight little smile, the one he wore when he closed a deal that screwed over a competitor. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I would cry, scream, beg him to believe me. He thought I was the desperate little girl who used to dye her hair brown in the bathroom sink. But that girl didn't live here anymore. I didn't reach for the pen he offered. I folded the document neatly and placed it in my purse. Thank you for the reminder, Dad, I said. My voice was light, almost pleasant. You are absolutely right. We should settle this. I will take care of it. Richard blinked. The smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected compliance. He wanted a fight because he knew how to win fights. He didn't know how to handle agreement. Good, he grunted, recovering. Tomorrow morning, the technician. I will handle the logistics, I cut in. I am an adult, after all. If we are doing this, we are doing it properly. I will make sure the results are ready well before the wedding. I stood up. Come on. Luke, we have a long drive back to Richmond. I walked over to my mother and kissed her on the cheek. Her skin was cold. She didn't look up. I walked past Evan without a word. I stopped at Margot's chair. She squeezed my hand. Her grip surprisingly strong. Drive safe, darling, Margot said. And check your email later. I nodded, feeling the weight of that sentence. The drive back to Richmond took 2 hours. For the first 45 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the wind rushing past the windows of Luke's truck. Luke was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He was a good man, a simple man in the best way possible. He loved me. He loved his work, and he told the truth. The Collins way of life, the manipulation, the secrets, the emotional chess games was alien to him. I can't believe him. Luke finally exploded, hitting the steering wheel with the palm of his hand. I swear, Juliet, if he wasn't your father questioning your mother's fidelity at the dinner table, threatening our wedding, it is sick, It is psychologically sick. He looked over at me, expecting to see tears. He reached out to comfort me. Babe, I am so sorry. You don't have to do this. We can elope. We can get married in the backyard. We don't need his money, and we definitely don't need his permission. I turned to look at him, the passing streetlights rhythmically illuminating my face. I am not sad. Luke, I said. He glanced at me, confused. What? I am not sad, I repeated. And we are not eloping. I reached into my purse and pulled out the DNA consent form. I stared at it in the dim light. He wants a show, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the polite daughter facade I had worn at the table. He wants a public trial. He wants to stand in front of everyone and prove that I'm a bastard, so he can finally justify why he has treated me like garbage for 28 years. He wants to be the victim. I ripped the form in half. Then I ripped it again. He thinks this test is going to humiliate me, I said. He thinks it is going to prove I don't belong. Luke slowed the car down slightly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Juliet, what are you thinking? I looked out the window at the dark silhouette of the Virginia trees. My mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't looked at in years. I thought about the way Margot had looked at me. I thought about a specific conversation I had with her 3 years ago. When I turned 25, flashback, Margot had called me into her study. She had handed me a thick manila envelope. These are your birth records, she had said. Not just the certificate, the hospital bracelets, the discharge papers, the billing receipts. Your mother was out of it when we left the hospital. Richard was busy with work. I kept everything. Why are you giving me this? I had asked. Because in this family, paper is the only shield you have. She had replied. Keep them safe. Hide them. Don't ask me why yet. Just promise me you will keep them. End flashback. I had shoved that envelope into the back of my filing cabinet and forgotten about it. But tonight, the memory surfaced with crystal clarity. Margot knew. She had always known this day would come. I am going to take the test, I told Luke. But I am not using his technician. I am not using his lab. I am not giving him a single chance to tamper with the results or spin the narrative. I am going to an independent lab, and I'm going to test myself, Mom, and him. He won't give you a sample if he thinks you are controlling it, Luke said. He won't know, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. He is so arrogant. He thinks he has already won. He thinks I am just a scared little girl who will do exactly as she is told. I will play the part. I will let him think he is leading the dance. I rolled down the window and threw the pieces of Richard's consent form into the night. He wants to prove I am not his daughter, I said to the wind. Fine, I will prove it. But I am going to find out exactly what happened 28 years ago. And when I do, I am not just going to show him the results in an email. I am going to give him the audience he asked for. I turned back to Luke. He said he wouldn't come to the wedding unless I proved I belonged. Well, I am going to make sure he attends, and I'm going to make sure it is a day he regrets for the rest of his life. Luke looked at me, and for the first time that night, he smiled. It was a nervous smile, but it was there. Remind me never to piss you off, Jules. Too late for him, I said. I pulled out my phone. I didn't check social media. I opened my banking app. I had $3,000 in savings, my escape fund, that I had been building since college. It was enough for a expedited, court-admissible DNA triad test from a top-tier private lab. Then I opened my email. There was a message from Margot. Sent 5 minutes ago. No subject line. Just a single line of text. Check the timestamp on the birth certificate against the nursing log in the envelope. There is a 9-minute gap. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. A 9-minute gap in a hospital. 9 minutes is an eternity. 9 minutes is enough time for a tragedy or a crime. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The tears I had held back at dinner never came. They had evaporated, replaced by cold, hard resolve. Richard Collins wanted the truth. I was going to give it to him. I was going to dig up every buried lie in the family graveyard, and I wasn't going to stop until I knew exactly why a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl ended up in a house full of strangers. The countdown to the wedding had begun, but the countdown to my revenge had started 28 years ago. I just didn't know it until tonight. The first time I realized I was a walking contradiction in my own home. I was 7 years old. It was a 4th of July barbecue, the kind of event my father orchestrated with military precision rather than festive spirit. The lawn at Briarcliff was manicured to within an inch of its life, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and charcoal. I remember running through the sprinklers, my hair wet and bright yellow against the sun, shrieking with the kind of unfiltered joy that Richard Collins detested. My father was holding court near the grill, a glass of scotch in one hand despite the midday heat. He watched me run past, and he didn't smile. He reached out, not to catch me, but to stop me. His hand was heavy on my shoulder, anchoring me to the spot. "Look at her," he said to his business partner. "A man whose name I have long forgotten. Just look. Where did those jeans come from? Certainly not from me, and certainly not from Stephanie. Unless she is hiding a Swedish ancestors or a very blonde tennis instructor." The men laughed. It was a low rumble of a sound, devoid of warmth. I didn't understand the implication of the tennis instructor comment then, but I understood the tone. I looked at my arm against his. His skin was olive, tanning deeply in the summer sun. Mine was pale, dusting with freckles, burning pink if I wasn't careful. He looked at me like I was a bad investment, a stock that had plummeted the moment the market opened. That was the day I stopped running through sprinklers. I learned that my existence was something to be apologized for, not celebrated. Richard Collins was not a man of physical violence. He never raised a belt. He never threw a vase. He did not need to be violent because he understood that physical bruises heal, but financial and emotional strangulation leaves scars that last a lifetime. He ruled our household with a terrifying, calm quietness. His weapon of choice was the checkbook and the dinner table conversation. The disparity between my brother Evan and me wasn't just apparent. It was a policy. When Evan turned 16, there was a brand new SUV waiting in the driveway with a red bow on the hood. Richard called it an investment in safety. When I turned 16, I was handed a bus schedule and a lecture about the value of hard work. When it came time for college, Evan was ushered into his university of choice with full tuition paid, a luxury apartment off campus, and a monthly allowance that rivaled a teacher's salary. Richard called it securing the legacy. When I was accepted into my dream school, Richard sat me down in his study and told me that he would not be throwing good money after bad. He said that since my lineage was questionable, my inheritance was non-existent. I took out loans. I worked double shifts at a dive bar downtown. Coming home smelling of stale beer and grease at 3 a.m, studying until my eyes blurred, I paid for every textbook, every credit hour, every meal, and every time I came home for a holiday, exhausted and thinner than before. Richard would look at me with that same cold detachment and ask if I was finally ready to admit that I didn't have the stamina for the real world. He wanted me to fail. That is the truth I carried in my chest like a stone. He wanted me to fail so he could point to it and say, "See, she does not have the Collins drive. She is not one of us." But the person who suffered the most wasn't me. It was my mother. Stephanie Collins was a woman trapped in a glass box, gasping for air while everyone outside watched and did nothing. I used to wonder why she didn't leave him, why she didn't pack a bag, grab me, and drive until the gas ran out. But Richard had constructed a cage made of psychological warfare. If she defended herself, if she screamed that she had never been unfaithful, Richard would raise an eyebrow and say she was protesting too much. He would say that only a guilty woman gets that hysterical, if she stayed silent, refusing to dignify his accusations with a response. He would nod slowly and say her silence was an admission of guilt. There was no winning. There was no exit. He used me as the whip to keep her in line. If she wanted to buy new curtains, he would bring up my tuition. If she wanted to go on a trip with her friends, he would ask if she was going to meet the same man she met 28 years ago. I watched my mother shrink. I watched her voice get quieter, her opinions fewer. I watched her start taking long naps in the afternoon and finding solace in glasses of Chardonnay that started earlier and earlier in the day. There was a year, when I was 20, that she had a breakdown. The pressure had finally snapped something vital inside her. She spent 2 weeks in a private facility to manage severe anxiety and exhaustion. When she came home, fragile and trembling, Richard didn't offer comfort. He offered judgment. He told the family, in hushed, mock-concerned tones, that Stephanie's guilt was finally eating her alive. He spun her mental health crisis into evidence of her infidelity. He made her pain about him. Margot, my grandmother, was the only one who saw the machinery behind the curtain. One afternoon, while we were gardening, one of the few activities Richard deemed appropriate for women and thus ignored, she told me the truth about him. "He does not love people, Juliet," she had said, snapping the stem of a dead rose with surprising force. "He loves the name. He loves the idea of the Collins dynasty. Anything that threatens the purity of that image is an enemy. You are not just a daughter he doubts. You are a blemish on his ego. And Richard would burn this whole house down before he let a blemish survive." That context was playing on a loop in my head as Luke and I sat in our apartment in Richmond. It was late, past midnight. The adrenaline from the dinner had faded, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. Luke was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at the wall, a beer untouched in front of him. He looked at me, his expression dark. "You know what scared me the most tonight?" he asked. I looked up from my laptop, where I was researching private genetic labs. "What?" "It was not the test," Luke said. "It was the timing. Juliet, why did he wait 28 years? He could have done this when you were born. He could have done it when you were 10. He could have done it before you went to college." I shrugged, though I felt the chill of his logic. He liked the torture. He liked holding it over us. "No," Luke said, shaking his head. "That is part of it." "Sure, but he is a businessman. He deals in leverage. He waited until 6 weeks before your wedding. He waited until the invitations were sent. He waited until the stakes were as high as they could possibly get." Luke leaned forward, his voice dropping. "He does not just want to know if you are his daughter. He wants to destroy you publicly, if that test comes back negative. He is not just going to send you a private email. He is going to announce it. He wants to stand up in that church, or at the rehearsal dinner, and present the evidence. He wants to play the victim in front of the biggest audience he can gather. He wants to be the martyr who raised another man's child, and he wants you to be the fraud." I stopped typing. The cursor blinked on the screen, a steady, rhythmic pulse. Luke was right. I had been thinking about this as a quest for truth. But for Richard, it was a staged execution. He had invited the audience. He had set the date. He had probably rehearsed his speech. Every family gathering where he cracked a joke about my hair color. Every Christmas toast where he made a subtle dig about loyalty, it was all preparation. He had been grooming our relatives, our friends, and his business partners to take his side. He had planted the seeds of doubt for decades, so that when the tree finally fell, everyone would say they saw it coming. He wanted a trial. I closed my laptop with a snap. The sound echoed in the small kitchen. "If he wants a trial," I said, my voice steady, "then he needs to be prepared for the evidence to be cross-examined." I walked over to the window and looked out at the streetlights of Richmond. I thought about Evan, the golden boy who was too afraid of losing his allowance to defend his sister. I thought about my mother, popping pills to numb the shame of a crime she never committed. And I thought about Richard, sleeping soundly in his mansion, convinced that he held all the cards. He thought the DNA test was his ace in the hole. He thought science would vindicate his cruelty. I am going to give him exactly what he asked for. I told Luke, I am going to give him the most public, undeniable, scientifically backed reveal this family has ever seen. I turned back to the room, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the victim of the Collins family drama. I felt like the director. But, I added, feeling the weight of Margot's secret envelope in my mind. He is assuming the story ends with him being right. He has no idea that he is not the author of this tragedy. He is just a character, and I am about to write him out of the script. The next morning, I would call Clear Helix. I would set the wheels in motion. But I wasn't just looking for a paternity match. I was looking for the 9 minutes that my grandmother had warned me about. Because if Richard wasn't my father, and Stephanie wasn't an adulterer, then the answer didn't lie in a bedroom affair. It lay in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of a hospital almost 3 decades ago. And unlike my mother, I wasn't going to be silent. I was going to scream the truth so loud it would shatter the windows of the Ashford Yacht and Country Club. Richard wanted a show fine. I would give him the performance of a lifetime. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I turned my dining room table into a war room. The first step was selecting the battleground. Richard assumed we would use the concierge medical service he had on retainer, a private doctor in Alexandria who played golf with him on Sundays and likely knew how to make uncomfortable medical realities disappear for the right price. I was not going to give him that home field advantage. I needed a fortress of scientific neutrality. I spent 4 hours researching genetic laboratories, bypassing anything with a local office in Virginia, where a Collins name drop might carry weight. I settled on Clear Helix Genetics based in California. They were AABB accredited, specialized in court-admissible forensic testing, and most importantly, they had zero connection to the East Coast social circle my father dominated. They did not care about the Briarcliff estate or the upcoming wedding of the season. They only cared about alleles and markers. The next morning, I initiated the protocol. I did not ask Richard for permission. I sent him a DocuSign agreement from Clear Helix, outlining a legal chain of custody triad test. The terms were explicit. A neutral third-party collector would visit his office to verify his identity. Take the swab and seal it instantly. I would do the same. My mother would do the same. No private doctors, no lost samples, no room for error. I included a brief note in the email. Since we are proving the truth, let us make sure it stands up in a court of law. I have arranged the collection. Please sign attached. He signed it within 12 minutes. I could almost feel his arrogance radiating through the screen. He probably thought my insistence on legal procedure was cute. A child playing at being a lawyer. He did not realize that by signing, he had just locked himself into a process he could not manipulate. The hardest part was Stephanie. I drove to the house in Briarcliff around 10 in the morning, knowing Richard would be at the firm. My mother was in the sunroom, arranging hydrangeas with trembling hands. When I explained what I needed, she froze. She looked at the sterile swab kit in my hand as if it were a loaded weapon. "He will be so angry if he knows you came here," she whispered. "He already knows," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. He signed the consent. "Mom, we are doing this. I need your sample to prove that I am yours. If I test just against him, he can spin it. He can say you stepped out. But if I match you and not him, it proves half the story. If I match neither, well, we cross that bridge if we get there." She sat down heavily on the floral love seat. "Juliet, look at me. I carried you. I remember the heartburn. I remember the kicks. I remember the way you screamed when you came out. You are my daughter. Then help me prove him wrong," I said. "Please." She opened her mouth, and I swabbing the inside of her cheek. It took 10 seconds. As I sealed the tube, she grabbed my wrist. Her eyes were wet. "Whatever that paper says," she told me, her voice cracking, "you are the only thing in this house that I have ever truly loved." I kissed her forehead and left before I could crumble. I had the samples. I had the chain of custody. Now I needed the history. I returned to my apartment and opened the manila envelope Margot had given me. It smelled of old cedar and dust. Inside was a chaotic timeline of my first 24 hours on Earth. There was my birth certificate, smooth and official. There were billing receipts from Harborlight Women's Hospital. And then there were the nursing logs, photocopies of handwritten notes that Margot must have swiped or demanded decades ago. I spread them out. looking for the anomaly Margot had hinted at. It took me 2 coffees to find it, but once I saw it, I could not look away. On the official birth certificate, my time of birth was recorded as 11:51 at night. But on the copy of the nursing shift log, the handwriting noted patient Collins, delivery complete, female infant, vital signs stable, 11:42 at night, 9 minutes. To a layman, 9 minutes is a rounding error. It is a slow clock. It is a nurse forgetting to write something down until she has washed her hands. But in a hospital, 9 minutes is a lifetime. 9 minutes is the difference between brain damage and health. 9 minutes is enough time to resuscitate, or, in a busy maternity ward with understaffed shifts, 9 minutes is enough time for a mistake. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Clear Helix to confirm the courier pickup for the samples. While I waited on hold, I typed Harbor Light Women's Hospital 1996 scandal into the search bar. At first, there was nothing but generic accolades and fundraising gala photos. Richard's company had donated heavily to their new pediatric wing a decade ago, a detail that now felt less like charity and more like hush money. I dug deeper. I went into archived forums, the kind where disgruntled former employees vented before the posts were scrubbed by reputation management firms. I found a thread from 2004. A former billing specialist was ranting about records mismanagement in the late 90s. Deep in the comments, someone had replied, "Billing honey. That place had a wristband problem for 3 years before the board swept it under the rug. I know 2 families who walked out with the wrong chart. Thank God they caught it in the parking lot." My heart hammered against my ribs. Identification errors. I grabbed a legal pad and started a new list. Luke walked in just as I was taping the nursing log to the wall next to the birth certificate. He was still wearing his work boots, covered in drywall dust, but his face was grim. "You look like you are hunting a serial killer," he said, eyeing my wall of documents. "I am hunting a lie," I corrected. "Look at this. Luke, 9 minutes missing, a hospital with a rumor of protocol failures, and a father who is so sure I am not his that he is willing to bet a wedding on it." Luke set his keys down and walked over to the table. He looked at the paperwork, his contractor's eyes scanning for structural weaknesses. "Okay," he said slowly. "So you have a theory. You think you were switched, or you think the records were forged?" "I think Richard knows something," I said, "or he suspects something deeper than an affair. He has always accused Mom, but he never filed for divorce. Why? Because a divorce involves discovery. It involves lawyers digging into assets and timelines. He kept her close. He kept me close. He tortured us. But he kept us." Luke crossed his arms. "If you are going to drop a bomb this big, Juliet, you need more than a 9-minute gap and an internet comment. You need ironclad proof. If you stand up in front of your family and say, 'Oops, wrong baby,' without a smoking gun, Richard will sue you for slander and win." "I know," I said. "I am making a list." I showed him the notepad. 1 certified copy of the original birth registry, not just the certificate. 2. The discharge papers with the bracelet codes. 3. The name of the shift commander on duty that night. 4. The person who signed the bracelet transfer. "I need to find the people who were in that room," I said. "Paper can be forged, memories can be bought, but mistakes leave a trail." Luke looked at me. A strange mixture of admiration and worry in his eyes. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "Speaking of trails," he said, his voice tight, "I got an email from Richard's lawyer today." I froze. "What?" "They sent over a draft of a prenuptial agreement," Luke said, "and a modification to a trust fund document I did not even know existed." He handed me the phone. I scrolled through the dense legalese until I found the highlighted section. It was a conditional clause regarding the release of funds for the wedding and a future settlement. Clause 14B, release of any and all financial assets from the Collins Family Trust is contingent upon the beneficiary providing genetic verification of direct patrilineal descent. In the event of a non-match, all assets, including previous educational loans backed by the guarantor. shall be immediately recallable. I stared at the screen. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. He is not just cutting me off, I whispered. He is retroactively billing me. He wants to recall the loans he co-signed. He wants to bankrupt us before we even say, I do. He is expecting you to fail the test, Luke said. He is so sure of it that he is already writing the contract for the aftermath. I handed the phone back to Luke. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, crystallizing fury. Richard was not waiting for the results. He had already decided the verdict. He was treating my identity like a failed business merger, liquidating the assets and minimizing the losses. He thinks this is about money, I said. He thinks he can dangle the wedding budget and the trust fund over my head, and I will panic. He thinks I will come crawling back, begging him to keep the secret so I don't lose the lifestyle. I walked back to the wall and looked at the 9-minute gap. He does not understand, I said. I don't want his money. I want his reputation. I picked up a red marker and circled the name of the attending nurse on the photocopy of the log. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. D. Kearney. Luke, I said. I need you to help me find D. Kearney. She was the head nurse on the night shift at Harbor Light in 1996. If anyone knows why the time changed, it is her. Luke nodded. I have a buddy who is a private investigator for insurance fraud. He has access to databases we don't. I will send him the name. Do it, I said. And tell Richard's lawyer you are reviewing the documents. Stall him. Let Richard think we are sweating over the money. Let him think he has the upper hand. I looked at the consent forms for the DNA test, sitting on the counter, ready for the courier. The DNA is just the surface, I said, more to myself than to Luke. It is going to come back as a mismatch. I know it. Richard knows it, but he thinks the story ends there. He thinks the mismatch proves Mom is a cheater and I am a bastard. I tapped the red circle around D. Kearney's name. He has no idea that the mismatch is just the key to the real door. And when I open it, he is going to wish he had just paid for the damn wedding and kept his mouth shut. The game had changed. It was no longer about defending my mother's honor or proving my worth. It was an investigation into a theft. Someone had stolen my life 28 years ago. Richard Collins had spent decades blaming the wrong crime on the wrong people. I was going to find out who I really was, and I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, it didn't just whisper, it would scream. The Ashford Yacht and Country Club was a fortress of old money and older secrets, perched on the edge of the water like a white marble sentinel guarding the entrance to a world I was never truly allowed to enter. The air smelled of salt, expensive perfume, and the kind of heavy, cloying lilies they use at funerals. It was fitting, I supposed, because tonight felt less like the 30th anniversary of my father's real estate firm, and more like the funeral for my last shred of hope that this family could ever be normal. I wore a dress I had bought on sale, a deep emerald silk that I hoped made me look formidable. Richard had sent a stylist for my mother and a tailor for Evan. But I had been left to my own devices. That was the subtle art of Richard Collins. He did not ban me from the event. That would have raised questions. Instead, he invited me and then ensured I felt like a garnish on a plate of fine dining, unnecessary and slightly out of place. The ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. A string quartet played something baroque in the corner, the music struggling to rise above the din of polite laughter and the clinking of crystal. I stood near a pillar, clutching a glass of sparkling water like it was a lifeline. I watched my father work the room. Richard was in his element. He was charming, magnetic, and utterly terrifying. He placed a hand on the back of a senator, laughed at a joke made by a developer, and kissed the cheeks of wives who were terrified of him. To the world, he was the titan of Virginia industry, the benevolent patriarch. To me, he was the man who had slid a paternity test across a mahogany table like it was a death warrant. "Smile, Jules," a voice said beside me. "You look like you are at an autopsy." I turned to see Evan. He looked dashing in his custom tuxedo. his dark hair slicked back, a mirror image of the man holding court in the center of the room. But his eyes were tired. He held a scotch, his third by my count, and his grip was tight. "Maybe I am," I said, keeping my voice low. "We are just waiting to see whose body is on the table." Evan winced. He took a long sip of his drink. "Don't start. Just get through the speeches, eat the cake, and go home. Dad is in a mood tonight. He feels vindicated." "Vindicated?" I asked, turning to face him fully. "Because I agreed to his test. He thinks that is a victory." "He thinks he has you cornered," Evan said, looking away, scanning the crowd as if searching for an exit. "He thinks you are going to back down before the results come in. He thinks you will quietly disappear from the wedding photos to save face." "He doesn't know me at all," I said. Evan looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second, I saw the brother I used to play hide-and-seek with before the weight of the Collins name crushed him. "Just be careful, Juliet. He has the microphone tonight, and you know how he loves an audience." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the small stage at the front of the room. Richard walked up the steps, the applause rippling through the crowd like a wave. He adjusted the microphone, waiting for the silence to be absolute. He thrived on that silence. It was the sound of control. "Thank you," Richard said, his voice smooth as velvet. 30 years. It seems like a lifetime. And yet, it feels like only yesterday I was signing the deed on my first building." He went through the standard motions. He thanked his partners. He made a self-deprecating joke about the economy. Then, he turned his gaze to the family table, right where we were standing. "A man does not build a legacy alone," Richard said, his eyes locking onto Evan. "I look at my son, Evan, and I see the future. I see the strength, the intellect, and the pure Collins determination that will carry this company for another 30 years. Stand up, Evan." The spotlight swung to my brother. Evan stood, nodded, and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The room applauded. It was a coronation. "And my wife? Stephanie," Richard continued. The light moved to my mother. She sat frozen, her face a mask of pale foundation and fear. "Thank you for your patience. You have endured much to keep this house standing. You have weathered storms that would have broken lesser women." The phrasing was specific. Endured, weathered. He was not praising her loyalty. He was highlighting her burden. He was telling the room that being married to her was a charity project he had graciously undertaken. Then, the light moved. It hit me. I blinked against the glare. Feeling 500 pairs of eyes shift toward me, I stood straighter, refusing to flinch. "And Juliet," Richard said. He let the name hang in the air for a moment too long. "My daughter. We are all so looking forward to her wedding next month." There was a polite murmur of agreement from the crowd. Richard smiled. But it was not a smile. It was a baring of teeth. "You know," he said, leaning casually against the podium, dropping his voice to a conversational tone that made the microphone intimacy feel violated. "I was reading an article the other day about nature, specifically about birds. Did you know there are certain species that lay their eggs in the nests of others? The cuckoo bird, I believe." The room went deadly silent. The air conditioning seemed to hum louder. "The unsuspecting parents raised the chick," Richard continued, his eyes drilling into mine across the ballroom. "They feed it. They protect it, even though it looks nothing like them, even though its feathers are the wrong color and its song is in a different key. They do it out of duty, because once you invite something into your nest, you are responsible for it. Aren't you?" He paused. A few people chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a metaphor for business or something far darker. "But eventually," Richard said, his voice hardening, "the truth of nature comes out. You cannot hide biology under a tuxedo or a wedding dress. Eventually, the cuckoo has to fly with its own kind." He raised his glass. "To the truth. May it always find its way home." He drank. The room hesitated, a collective stumble. Before drinking with him, The applause was scattered, confused. People whispered behind their hands. They knew. Everyone in that room knew the rumors Richard had been feeding them for decades. He had just called me a bastard in front of the entire Virginia elite, and he had done it with a smile. I stood there, the spotlight burning my skin. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I did not look down. I did not run. I looked directly at Evan. My brother was staring into his glass of scotch. He did not look at me. He did not stand up. He did not throw his drink. His silence was loud, a deafening confirmation that in the court of Richard Collins, Evan was a loyal subject, not a brother. I looked at my mother. She had her eyes closed, her lips moving in a silent prayer or a plea for the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Richard descended the stairs, the crowd parting for him. He walked straight toward me. He stopped 2 feet away, smelling of victory and expensive gin. "Just a little story about nature, Juliet," he said softly, so only I could hear. "Don't take it personally." I looked him in the eye. I didn't see a father. I didn't even see a monster. I saw a man who was terrified of something I couldn't yet name. "I will remember tonight," I said. My voice was steady, clearer than I expected. "And I promise you, Richard, everyone else in this room will remember it too, but not for the reason you think." I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not run. I walked with the cadence of a woman who had just declared war. I headed for the terrace doors, needing oxygen. The night air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I walked to the stone railing and gripped it, my knuckles turning white. A moment later, the door opened behind me. It was Stephanie. She was gasping for air, her hand clutching her chest. Margot was right behind her, looking like a fury in a silk shawl. "He can't do that," Stephanie sobbed. "He can't say those things, not in front of everyone." "He just did," Margot snapped, though her anger wasn't directed at my mother. She moved to Stephanie and rubbed her back, her eyes fixed on me. "He is escalating. He feels the ground shifting, and he is trying to burn the map." "Why?" I asked. I turned to face them, the ocean wind whipping my hair across my face. "Why does he hate me this much? It is not just about the affair. Grandma, even if Mom had cheated, men forgive, or they divorce. They don't spend 28 years conducting a psychological experiment on their child. He enjoys it. He likes humiliating us." Stephanie wiped her eyes, her mascara smearing. "He has always been jealous, possessive. He couldn't stand that you were different." "No," Margot said sharply. Her voice cut through the sound of the waves. "It is not jealousy, Stephanie. It is distraction." I looked at my grandmother. "What do you mean?" Margot stepped closer to me, her face illuminated by the light spilling from the ballroom windows. Inside, the party continued, a grotesque pantomime of happiness. "Richard Collins does not do anything without a profit motive," Margot said. "If he is selling the story of the adulterous wife and the illegitimate daughter, it is because he is trying to keep people from looking at the alternative." "The alternative being what?" I asked. "That he is not my father." "That he knows exactly what happened that night," Margot whispered. The wind seemed to carry her words away, but I caught them. "The night you were born, Juliet, it was chaotic, but Richard was not confused. He was managing." "Managing what?" "The hospital administration," Margot said. "I saw him, while your mother was hemorrhaging, while the nurses were running around. Richard was not by her bedside. He was in the hallway, talking to a man in a suit. He looked composed. Too composed for a man whose wife was bleeding out and whose child was in distress." I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the weather. "You think he knew about the 9 minutes?" "I think Richard has never been a victim in his life," Margot said. "And if he is pushing this paternity test so hard, it is because he is certain of the outcome. But why is he certain? That is the question you need to ask." She grabbed my arm. "He is not afraid of the truth. Juliet, he is afraid of your truth, but he seems very comfortable with his own version. which means his version is protected. My mother looked up, her eyes wide. Mom, what are you saying? I am saying, Margot said, looking back at the ballroom where Richard was laughing with a client, that your husband is a man who fixes problems. And 28 years ago, maybe he didn't just fix a business deal. Maybe he fixed a family. I stared at the closed doors of the yacht club. The pieces were shifting in my head. The 9-minute gap, the missing records, the donation to the hospital wing, and now, Richard's absolute confidence. He wasn't gambling on the DNA test. He knew the result because he had likely engineered the scenario that created it. He wasn't the cuckoo's victim. He was the one who built the nest. I have to go, I said. I can't be here. Go, Margot said. Take your mother's car. I will get her home. I ran to the parking lot, my heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown. I got into the car and locked the doors, my heart racing. I needed to talk to Luke. I needed to hear a voice that wasn't poisoned by Colin's toxicity. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Luke. I picked it up, expecting reassurance, expecting him to tell me he loved me. Instead, the screen read, I heard from the PI. He found Dee. Kearney. She is terrified. Jules. She hung up the second I mentioned the hospital, but before she did, she said something you need to know. She said, if you want to know about the Collins baby, ask about the other one. I stared at the phone. The other one. A second text came through immediately after. If you want to end this, you have to be ready. This isn't just about an affair. Juliet, you need to prepare yourself for a truth that is heavier than infidelity. I think there is someone else out there. I dropped the phone. The engine idled, the vibration humming through the seat. Richard's speech about the cuckoo bird replayed in my mind. Nature playing tricks, the child in the wrong nest. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was mocking me with the literal truth. I put the car in gear and peeled out of the Ashford Yacht and Country Club. The tears finally came, hot and angry. I wasn't just fighting for my name anymore. I was fighting for a ghost that had been living in the shadow of my life for 28 years. And if Richard Collins thought he could keep us both buried, he was about to learn that the dead have a nasty habit of waking up. The rain in Virginia does not wash things clean. It just makes the mud deeper. It was a Thursday night, 3 days after the disastrous party at the yacht club, and the sky had opened up with a violence that rattled the windows of my apartment in Richmond. I was sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my investigation, the photocopied nursing logs, the list of names, the sticky notes connecting dates and times. Luke was in the kitchen making tea, trying to keep the atmosphere normal, but the air was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. We were waiting. Clear Helix had promised a turnaround time of 72 hours for expedited legal processing. It was hour 71. My laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen glowing like a vigilant eye in the dim room. I kept refreshing the inbox. Every time the page reloaded, my heart hammered against my ribs. I told myself I was ready. I told myself I knew what was coming. I was prepared to see the confirmation that Richard Collins was not my father. I had spent 28 years being told I did not belong, and I was finally ready to agree with him so I could be free of him. Then, the notification sound chimed. It was a cheerful, innocent ding that had no business announcing the end of my life as I knew it. "Juliet," Luke called out from the kitchen, the kettle whistling in the background. "It is here," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. I pulled the laptop onto my lap. My hands were trembling so badly I had to steady my right hand with my left, just to navigate the trackpad. The subject line was purely administrative. Clear Helix Genetics Case Number 49221. Secure results available. I clicked the link. I entered my password. I waited for the spinning wheel to resolve into a PDF document. The file opened. I skipped the legal disclaimers. I skipped the methodology definitions. I scrolled straight to the table at the bottom of page 1. Subject 1, Richard Collins. Subject 2, Juliet Collins. Relationship probability paternity. Result 0.00%. Excluded. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. There it was. The scientific validation of every cold shoulder, every snub, every a Fairchild joke. He was right. He was not my father. I felt a strange, jagged mixture of relief and grief. I was not a Collins. I was free. I scrolled down to the next section. I needed to see the confirmation of my mother. I needed to see the 99.9% match that would prove she was my only parent, the only person who had ever truly claimed me. Subject 1, Stephanie Collins. Subject 2, Juliet Collins. Relationship probability maternity. Result 0.00%. Excluded. I blinked. I leaned closer to the screen. I wiped my eyes, thinking perhaps the contact lenses I had been wearing for 14 hours were blurring my vision. I read it again. Result 0.00%. Excluded. The room tilted. I mean that literally. The floor seemed to pitch sideways like the deck of a ship in a storm. My stomach lurched into my throat. No, I whispered. I scrolled up. I checked the case numbers. I checked the names. Stephanie Collins. Juliet Collins. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe they swapped the samples. Maybe the control fluid was contaminated. I read the summary paragraph below the data tables. The language was clinical, devoid of mercy. Based on the analysis of 15 short tandem repeat loci, the probability of maternity is 0. The donor of sample B is not the biological offspring of the donor of sample A. The results are conclusive and legally admissible. Juliet. Luke was standing over me now, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. He saw my face and set the mugs down on the table with a clatter. Juliet, what is it? Did he pay them off? I could not speak. My tongue felt like it had swollen to twice its size. I turned the laptop toward him. Luke read the screen. He read it once, his brow furrowing. He read it again. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. Wait, he said. That is impossible. That says you are not neither of them. I am not her daughter, I choked out. The words tasted like ash. Luke, I am not her daughter. But she gave birth to you, Luke said, his contractor's brain trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We have the pictures. We have the birth certificate. You look like well. You don't look like them. But I am nobody, I said. I looked at my hands. They looked the same as they had 5 minutes ago. Pale skin, long fingers, the small scar on my thumb from a cooking accident. But suddenly, they felt like foreign objects, whose DNA was building these bones, whose blood was pumping through these veins. I grabbed my phone. I dialed my mother's number. I did not care that it was 10 at night. I did not care that Richard might be in the room. She answered on the second ring. Juliet, is everything okay? Her voice was so warm, so familiar. It was the voice that had sung me lullabies and comforted me when Richard was cruel. Mom, I said, and then I broke. Mom, the results came back. Oh, honey, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know you are scared, but it does not matter. Richard can say whatever he wants. We know the truth. I know who you are. No, I said, tears streaming down my face, hot and fast. No, you don't. Mom, you don't know. What are you talking about? Open your email, I said. I forwarded it to you. Open it now. I heard the rustling of fabric, the sound of her moving to her iPad. I heard the tap of the screen. Then, silence. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Then, a sound came through the phone that I will never forget as long as I live. It was not a scream. It was a gasp, a sharp intake of air like someone had just been punched in the solar plexus. This is wrong, Stephanie said. Her voice was high, frantic. This is broken. The machine is broken. It is not broken, Mom, I said. It is a legal test. It is 0%. For both of you. That is not possible, she shouted. and I heard the iPad clatter to the floor. I was there. I was in that room. I felt the pain. I remember the doctor putting you on my chest. You were slippery and crying, and you had that little red mark on your forehead. I nursed you. I know my own child. You nursed a child, I said, feeling the cold logic of the investigation settle over my grief like a shroud. But you didn't nurse your biological daughter. Stop it, she cried. Stop saying that. You are mine. You are my Juliet. Mom, listen to me, I said, trying to steady my voice. Is Grandma there? Put Grandma on. She is in the guest room, Stephanie stammered, weeping openly now. Get her, I commanded. A minute later, Margot's voice came on the line. She sounded awake, alert. Juliet, talk to me. Did you see the results? I asked. I'm looking at them now, Margot said. Her voice was steel. She was not crying. 0 match for Stephanie. How? I asked. How does that happen? Grandma, how does a woman give birth and leave with a different baby? The 9 minutes, Margot said instantly. The 9 minutes, the gap in the nursing log, the time between 11:42 and 11:51. The hospital, I whispered. It is the only explanation, Margot said. Stephanie was under heavy sedation after the epidural complications. Richard was occupied. The nursery was understaffed. We always knew something was wrong that night. Juliet, we just thought the secret was infidelity. We never imagined it was theft. My mind raced back to the text Luke had received from the private investigator. Ask about the other one. D. Kearney knew. The billing clerk knew. There were 2 babies, 2 girls, and for 28 years, I had been living in the wrong house, fighting for the love of a man who wasn't my father, while my real parents were where, and the real Juliet Collins. Where was she? Oh my God, I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. There is another girl. There is a real Collins daughter out there. And she probably looks just like Evan, Margot said grimly. Before I could process that, another notification pinged on my laptop, then another on my phone. Then Luke's phone buzzed. It was an email, a mass email. I looked at the sender, Richard Collins via Collins Group Executive Server. I looked at the recipient list. It was exhaustive. It included me, Evan, Stephanie, Margot, Luke, but it also included the family lawyer, the wedding planner, the pastor of our church, the board members of his company, and every cousin and aunt in the Collins family tree. The subject line was typed in all caps, official statement regarding paternity and trust fund disbursement. He sent an email, Luke said, looking at his phone with disgust. He sent it to everyone. I opened it. My hands were shaking again. Dear family and friends, for nearly 3 decades, I have been the subject of whispered rumors and unjust accusations regarding my treatment of Juliet. I have been painted as a cold father and a suspicious husband. I have borne these insults in silence to protect the dignity of my wife. However, truth is the only foundation upon which a family can stand. As of this evening, I have received the independent DNA results from Clear Helix Genetics. As I have suspected for 28 years, the results confirm that I am not the biological father of Juliet. While this brings me no joy, it does bring vindication. I have been asked to support, finance, and endorse a lie. I will no longer do so, effective immediately. The wedding funds are frozen, and the trust access is revoked. I hope that Stephanie will finally offer the explanation she has owed me since 1996. I wish Juliet the best in finding her biological father, whoever he may be. Sincerely, Richard Collins. I stared at the screen. The arrogance was breathtaking. He had seen the result 0% paternity and stopped reading. He had been so eager to spike the football, so desperate to prove my mother was a whore and I was a bastard, that he hadn't scrolled down. He hadn't seen the second table. He hadn't seen that his wife was just as excluded as he was. He thought he had just won the war. He thought he had just destroyed my mother's reputation and cut me out of the family fortune with a single click. He does not know, I said, a strange, Cold laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was the laugh of someone standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing they can fly. He didn't read the whole report. He just admitted to the whole world that he is not your father, Luke said. And he blamed your mom. He just handed us the weapon, I said. I picked up the phone again. Grandma. I saw the email, Margot said. He is a fool, a hasty, arrogant fool. Don't tell him, I said. Grandma, do not tell him. Do not let Mom tell him. Juliet, he needs to know. Stephanie sobbed in the background. No, I shouted. He does not get to know, not yet. He wants a public reckoning. He wants to drag this family through the mud. Fine, but we are going to do it on my terms. I looked at Luke. We need to find her. We need to find the other girl, the real Juliet Collins. Kit Hale, Luke said. What? The PI, Luke said, scrolling through his texts. He sent a follow-up while you were on the phone. D. Kearney didn't just give a warning. She dropped a name before she panicked. She said she checks up on the other girl sometimes online. Her name is Catherine Hale. She goes by Kit. She lives in Dayton, Ohio. Dayton, Ohio, 400 miles away. Get the car keys, I said to Luke. Now, Luke asked. It is pouring rain. It is late. Richard just declared war on my mother, I said, closing the laptop with a snap. He thinks the story is about adultery. I am going to bring him the one thing that proves him wrong. I am going to bring him his daughter. I stood up. The shock was still there, buzzing in my veins, but the paralysis was gone. I wasn't Juliet Collins, the affair child. I was a stranger who had been kidnapped by a clerical error. I had no name, I had no history, but I had a mission. I am going to find Kit Hale, I said, and then I am going to introduce her to her father. I looked at the email from Richard one last time. I wished Juliet the best in finding her biological father. Be careful what you wish for. Dad, I whispered. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the storm. The rain didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like fuel. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, hanging low and heavy over the city. I did not sleep after reading Richard's mass email. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom limb of a family I never actually had. But as the sun struggled to rise, the grief hardened into something useful. It turned into cold, bureaucratic determination. I drove to Harbor Light Women's Hospital at 8 a.m. It was a sprawling complex of glass and steel, gleaming with the kind of sterile efficiency that is supposed to make you feel safe, but only makes you feel small. I walked into the main atrium, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax hitting me like a physical blow. This was where it happened. This was where Stephanie Collins cried out in labor, where Richard Collins paced the hallway, and where someone, in a span of 9 minutes, changed the trajectory of 2 lives. I went straight to the records department in the basement. It was a windowless room fluorescently lit and staffed by women who looked like they had heard every sob story in the state of Virginia. I approached the counter, my ID and a notarized request form in hand. I need my full medical birth records, I told the woman behind the glass. Her name tag read, Patricia. Not just the summary, the full chart, nursing notes, shift logs, discharge vitals, everything from November 12th, 1996. Patricia sighed, typed my name into her computer, and clicked the mouse with a rhythmic, bored, steady beat. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she frowned. She typed again, harder this time. That is odd, she muttered. What is odd? I asked, leaning closer to the glass. I have your admission, she said. I have the billing code, but the actual medical file, it is restricted. Restricted, I am the patient. You cannot restrict my own history from me. It says here, data not available per administrative hold. Patricia read. She looked up at me, her boredom replaced by mild confusion. Usually, this only happens if there is an active legal case or if the files were part of a system purge. But we digitized everything in 2010. Nothing should be missing. Check again, I said, my voice rising. Please, she shook her head. I am sorry, ma'am. The system is blank. It is like the file exists, but the contents have been scooped out. I stood there, my hands gripping the countertop until my knuckles turned white. It was the same wall I had hit my entire life, the Collins influence, even here, in the basement of a hospital. Richard's shadow, or the shadow of his money, seemed to block the light. As I turned to leave, defeated. A younger woman who had been filing papers at a desk behind Patricia stood up. She walked over to the water cooler, which was near the exit door. As I passed her, she didn't look at me, but she spoke. The late 90s, she said, her voice barely a whisper, looking straight ahead at the water cooler bubbles. I stopped. Excuse me? She glanced around to make sure Patricia wasn't listening. We had a migration issue, but not really. There are boxes. The Special Archive. Ask about the risk management files from 1996 to 1998. They don't put those on the main server. Why? I whispered back. She looked at me then, and I saw a flicker of nervous recognition. Maybe she had seen Richard on the news. Maybe she just knew the smell of a cover-up. Because those are the files that cost the hospital money. If it is in the Special Archive, it means someone paid to keep it offline. She walked away before I could ask her name. I walked back to my car, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Risk management, paid to keep it offline. I sat in the driver's seat and called Margot. She answered on the first ring. They scrubbed the file, I said without preamble. Digital records are empty. A clerk told me they are in a special risk management archive. Of course they are, Margot said. Her voice was crisp, the voice of a woman who was done being surprised by corruption. Juliet, listen to me. I have been going through your grandfather's old ledgers. He kept track of everything Richard did in the early days, mostly because he didn't trust him. And in December of 1996, Margot said, 1 month after you were born, the Collins Group made a donation to the Harbor Light neonatal unit. I know, I said. They have a plaque. Richard loves to brag about it. It was not a normal donation. Juliet, Margot pressed. It was $250,000 in 1996. That was a fortune. And it was not processed through the charitable foundation. It was a direct transfer from the corporate contingency fund. The memo line just says, institutional support. I stared at the steering wheel. $250,000. You don't donate that kind of money just out of the kindness of your heart. Not if you are Richard Collins. You pay that kind of money to make a problem go away. He bought them, I whispered. He didn't know about the switch. He knew something went wrong, maybe a mix-up they caught, or thought they caught, and he paid them to ensure it never made the papers. He paid for the silence that allowed the lie to rot for 28 years. He bought a clean reputation, Margot confirmed, and in doing so, he cemented a tragedy. I hung up. I needed a human connection. Paper trails were good, but paper couldn't look you in the eye and lie. I needed Denise Kearney. Luke had sent me her file. Denise Kearney, 64 years old, retired head nurse. She lived in a small coastal town called Southport in North Carolina. I sat in the parking lot of the hospital that had erased me and dialed her number. The phone rang 4 times. Hello? The voice was brittle. Sounding older than 64, it was the voice of a smoker, raspy and thin. Miss Kearney, I asked. My name is Juliet Collins. There was a silence on the other end so profound, I thought the line had gone dead. Then, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I don't know anyone by that name, she said. The panic was immediate, spiking through the phone line. I think you do, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hand was shaking. I was born at Harbor Light Women's Hospital on November 12th, 1996. You were the charge nurse on the night shift. I have been retired for 10 years, she said, her words rushing out. I don't remember patients. That was a lifetime ago. It was the night the computers went down. I lied, guessing, trying to keep her on the line. It was the night of the 9-minute gap in the logs. The night you had 2 baby girls born within minutes of each other. Me. And Catherine Hale. The sound she made was not a word. It was a whimper. It was the sound of a woman who had been looking over her shoulder for 3 decades and had finally seen the ghost she feared. "I can't help you," she said. "Please, don't call this number again." "Denise, wait," I pleaded. "I have the DNA results. I know I was switched. I am not trying to sue you. I just want to know." "You don't know what you are doing," she hissed. The aggression in her voice was pure terror. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. It wasn't just a mistake. It was they made us sign. If I talk, I lose my pension. I lose my house. They said they would destroy us." "Who?" I demanded. "Who said that? The hospital or my father?" "Do not dig up that grave," she said. "There are bodies in it you are not ready to see." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my skin prickling with a cold sweat. They made us sign. That wasn't medical malpractice. That was a conspiracy. I drove back to the apartment, my mind racing. I needed legal armor. I couldn't just walk into this with righteous indignation. I needed a subpoena. I called a lawyer Luke had recommended, a shark in a cheap suit named Marcus Thorne, who specialized in civil litigation against insurance companies. I met him an hour later in a cramped office that smelled of stale coffee and old paper. I laid it all out, the DNA, the nursing logs, the donation, the blocked files, and Denise's reaction. Thorne listened, tapping a yellow pencil against his desk. When I finished, he whistled low and long. "You have a hell of a story, Ms. Collins," he said. "But right now, that is all it is, a story. The hospital will claim the records were lost in a purge. The donation will be justified as philanthropy. And this nurse, unless you get her under oath, her fear is hearsay." "So what do?" I asked. "We draft a complaint," Thorne said. "We name the hospital, the administrators from 1996, and we list John Does for the staff. We file it. That gives us subpoena power. Then we force them to open that special archive." "But if we file," I said, thinking of Richard. "It goes public. My father or the man who raised me will see it. He will use his lawyers to bury us before we even get to discovery." "That is the risk," Thorne agreed. "But right now, they are betting on your silence. They are betting you are just a confused girl who will give up when the door is locked." I stood up. "Draft it, but don't file it yet. I need one more thing before we pull the trigger." "What is that?" "I need the witness," I said. "I need Denise Kearney to look me in the face and tell me I am wrong." I went home. The storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and slick. Luke was waiting for me. He had printed out an article from the Richmond Gazette archives, dated February 1997. Hospital protocol reviewed after alleged ID mix-up. "It is small," Luke said, handing me the paper. "Page 12, buried next to the car ads. A family claimed they were given the wrong baby for an hour. The hospital called it a brief procedural anomaly and said safeguards were updated, no names mentioned." "It wasn't an anomaly," I said, reading the text. "It was a practice run, or maybe we were the ones they didn't catch in an hour." My phone buzzed on the table. It was midnight. The screen lit up with a text message from an unknown number. The area code was Coastal Carolina. I picked it up. "Stop digging. You are a nice girl. I looked you up. You have a life. If you keep pushing, the hospital legal team will not just sue you. They will bury you. And your father, he is not the only powerful man involved. Someone will be destroyed if this comes out." It was Denise. She must have saved my number from the call logs. I looked at the message. She was trying to protect me, in her own twisted way. She was trying to warn me that I was standing on a landmine, but she didn't understand. I had already stepped on it. The explosion had already happened when I opened that DNA email. Now, I was just trying to survive the shrapnel. I typed a reply. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg. I just appealed to the one thing I knew she had left her conscience. I am not a nice girl anymore. Denise. I am a woman who doesn't know her own name, and the someone who was destroyed. It wasn't the powerful men, it was me. It was my mother. It was the girl in Ohio. We are already destroyed. The only question is whether you want to die with the truth in your throat, or if you want to help us breathe. I hit send. I watched the 3 dots appear, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, a reply came. Meet me, tomorrow, the Starlight Diner in Marrowdale. Come alone. If I see a lawyer, I leave. I showed the phone to Luke. Marrowdale, Luke said. That is a 4-hour drive. Then we leave at dawn, I said. She said come alone, Luke warned. She said she didn't want to see a lawyer, I corrected. She didn't say I couldn't bring my fiancé to wait in the car. I went to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was sleeping soundly, convinced he had purged the affair child from his life. Somewhere in Ohio, Kit Hale was living a life that belonged to me, and somewhere in a hospital archive, a file was gathering dust that contained the price tag of my identity. The fear that Denise spoke of, the institutional fear, the weight of powerful men and silence, I felt it. It was heavy, but it wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was magnetic. It was pulling me toward the truth. Get some sleep, Luke, I said, turning away from the window. Tomorrow, we go catch a ghost. Marrowdale, North Carolina, was not a town you visited. It was a town you ended up in when you ran out of gas or luck. The Starlight Diner sat on the edge of a 2-lane highway that cut through dense, encroaching pine forests. The neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker. The S and the T burnt out, leaving it to read Our Light Diner, which felt appropriate. There was no light here, only shadows. I parked the car in the gravel lot, far away from the few pickup trucks scattered near the entrance. Luke killed the engine, but he did not unlock the doors immediately. He looked at the diner, his jaw set. I don't like this, Jules, he said. She is scared. Scared people are unpredictable. She is the only lead we have, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. Wait here. If I am not out in 45 minutes, come in, but not a minute sooner. She was specific. I stepped out into the humid air. It smelled of pine needles and old grease. I walked toward the entrance, clutching my purse against my side like a shield. Inside, the air conditioning was set to Arctic, a stark contrast to the muggy afternoon. The diner was a relic of the 70s, all vinyl booths and chrome that had lost its shine. I scanned the room. It was mostly empty, save for a trucker eating pie at the counter and an elderly couple in the corner. Then I saw her. Denise Kearney was sitting in the back booth, the furthest point from the door. She was smaller than I expected. In my head, the woman who had held the secret of my existence for 28 years was a towering figure, a villain. In reality, she was a fragile woman in a beige cardigan that swallowed her frame. Her hair was gray and thin, pulled back in a severe bun, and her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee, shaking so violently that the dark liquid rippled in concentric circles. I approached the booth. She looked up, and her eyes went wide. They were pale, watery eyes, rimmed with red. Ms. Kearney? I asked softly. She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her gaze tracing the line of my jaw, the shape of my nose, the color of my eyes. It wasn't a casual look. It was an inspection. It was as if she were looking for a ghost. Sit down, she whispered. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. Don't stand there. You are drawing attention. I slid into the booth opposite her. The vinyl squeaked. Thank you for meeting me. She ignored the pleasantry. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I almost didn't come. I have my bag packed in the car. After this, I am leaving. I am going to stay with my sister in Oregon. If they come looking, I won't be here. Who is they? Denise? I asked. The hospital. She let out a short, bitter laugh. The hospital is just a building. Honey, buildings don't threaten to take your pension. Buildings don't make you sign papers that say you will go to jail if you speak. She took a sip of coffee, the cup rattling against her teeth. Then she set it down and looked me dead in the eye. "You look just like her," she said. The air left my lungs. "Who?" "Your mother," Denise said. "Your real mother. You have her eyes. That same shade of blue. It is striking. I remember it because she looked at me with those eyes when I handed you to her. She trusted me." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't cry now. I needed facts. "What happened?" "Denise, the DNA test says I am not a Collins. It says Stephanie isn't my mother, but the birth certificate says she gave birth at 11:51. Denise reached into her oversized purse. She didn't pull out a phone or a tablet. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked and worn. The pages yellowed with age. "I was the charge nurse," she said, opening the book. "I was responsible for the floor. That night was a nightmare. We were short-staffed. 2 nurses called out with the flu. We had a trainee on rotation, a girl named Sarah, barely 20 years old. She meant well, but she was overwhelmed." She slid the notebook across the table. It was open to a page dated November 12, 1996. "Read the entry at the bottom," she commanded. I looked at the handwriting. It was rushed, jagged script in blue ink. 2340, baby girl Hale born, 7 pounds 4 ounces, healthy. Doctor, Evans attending, 2342. Baby girl Collins born, 7 pounds 2 ounces. Respiratory distress resolved. Doctor, Patel attending. 2 minutes apart, I whispered. Not 9. 2 minutes, Denise confirmed. 2 little girls, both healthy, both screaming. The nursery was full. Sarah, she took both of you for your first baths at the same time. It was against protocol to do 2 at once, but we were backed up. She closed her eyes, as if the memory was a physical pain. The ID bracelets were loose. They slide off sometimes when the babies are that small and wet from the birth fluids. Sarah took them off to wash the wrists. She put them on the counter, side by side. I felt sick. She switched them. She didn't mean to, Denise said, her voice trembling. She washed you. She washed the other baby. She dried you off. And when she reached for the bands, she grabbed the wrong ones. She put the Collins band on the Hale baby, and the Hale band on the Collins baby. And nobody noticed, I asked, my voice rising. Shh, Denise hissed, looking around the diner. Keep your voice down. She leaned in closer. We didn't notice until the shift change. 6 hours later, I was doing the final chart review. I saw the weight discrepancy. The Hale baby had lost 4 ounces in 6 hours. Impossible. The Collins baby had gained impossible. I checked the footprints, the ink prints we take at birth. So you knew, I said. You knew the next morning. Why didn't you fix it? Why didn't you run into the rooms and swap us back? I tried, Denise said. Tears were spilling onto her cheeks now. I went straight to the hospital administrator. I told him we had a code pink situation and identification error. I had the charts in my hand. I was ready to go to the mothers. Who stopped you? The board, Denise said. They called an emergency meeting within 20 minutes. The administrator, the head of risk management, and the hospital's legal counsel. They looked at the charts. They looked at the families. She took a deep breath. You have to understand the climate. Juliet, the hospital was already facing 2 malpractice suits from the previous year. They were bleeding money. If it came out that they had swapped babies, it would have been the end. Bankruptcy. Closure. So they stole my life to save their budget, I asked, trembling with rage. It wasn't just money, Denise said. That is what they told themselves to sleep at night. They said the mothers had already bonded. They said you had both been nursed. They said the trauma of ripping you apart and swapping you back would be worse than the lie. They decided to fix the records, not the families. Fix the records, I repeated. The phrase was so clinical, so monstrous. They altered the times, Denise said. They forged the logs to make it look like the births were further apart, to make a mix-up seem impossible. They made me sign a non-disclosure agreement. They told me if I ever spoke a word of this, I would lose my license. I would be sued for negligence. I would lose my pension. I was a single mother. Juliet, I had 2 kids in college. I was scared. And my father, I asked. Richard Collins, did he know? Denise hesitated. I don't know if he knew the details, but I know that 3 weeks later, the administrator called me into his office and told me the Collins issue had been handled. He said a generous donation had been made to the pediatric wing and that the file was to be moved to the deep archive. He said Mr. Collins was a man who appreciated discretion. He paid, I said. He didn't care which baby he had. He just wanted to make sure there was no scandal. He wanted a perfect family, Denise said. And a baby swap is messy. She reached into her purse again. I have one more thing. I shouldn't have kept this either. But I couldn't help it. I have watched her grow up from a distance. I check her social media every few months, just to make sure she's okay. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a Facebook profile page. This is the other girl, Denise said. This is the baby Sarah put the Collins bracelet on. I looked at the photo. The name at the top read, Catherine Kit Hale, location Dayton, Ohio. The profile picture showed a young woman laughing, holding a coffee cup in a snowy park. She was 28 years old, but it was her face that made the diner spin around me. She didn't look like me. She didn't have my blonde hair or my blue eyes. She had dark, almost black hair. She had eyes the color of wet asphalt. She had a sharp, defined jawline and a brow that was intense even when she was smiling. She looked like Richard. She looked like Stephanie. But most of all, she looked like Evan. She could have been his twin. The resemblance was so strong it was violent. It punched me in the gut. There was no denying it. Richard Collins had spent 28 years looking for his reflection in my face and hating me because he couldn't find it. And all the while, his real daughter, his genetic mirror image, was living in Ohio, probably wondering why she didn't look like her parents. Oh my God, I whispered. She is a Collins. She is undeniably a Collins. Her parents, the Hales, are good people, Denise said softly. School teachers. They have red hair. Both of them. Kit has always been the odd one out. I saw a post once where she joked about being adopted. She doesn't know. I stared at the photo of Kit Hale. I felt a surge of protectiveness I couldn't explain. She was my sister, not by blood, but by circumstance. We were 2 sides of the same tragedy. Does Richard know she exists? I asked. I doubt it, Denise said. If he knew he had a real daughter out there, do you think he would have kept you? He would have traded you in a heartbeat. She was right. Richard didn't know about Kit. He thought the mistake was infidelity. He thought he was the victim of a lying wife. I looked up at Denise. Can I keep this? I asked, tapping the notebook. Take it, she said, sliding out of the booth. She looked terrified. Take all of it. I don't want it anymore. It has poisoned my life enough. She stood up, pulling her cardigan tight around her. I am sorry. Juliet, I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. Wait, I said. Will you testify if I bring this to court? Will you tell them what you told me? Denise paused. She looked at the door, then back at me. I don't want to die with this in my throat, she said, echoing the words I had texted her. If you get a lawyer who can protect me, I will tell them. I will tell them about Sarah, about the bracelets, about the administrator. She turned and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the bright sunlight, leaving me in the shadows with the proof that would destroy my family. I sat there for a moment, looking at Kit Hale's face. Richard Collins had built his entire identity on bloodlines, on legacy, on the superiority of his genes. He had tortured me for not fitting that mold. I imagined the look on his face when he saw Kit. It wouldn't just be shock. It would be a total collapse of his reality. He had abandoned his own child to raise a stranger, and he had done it out of arrogance. I picked up the notebook and the photo. I slid them into my bag. I walked out to the car. Luke was waiting, his eyes scanning my face. Did you get it? He asked. I got everything, I said, climbing into the passenger seat. And I pulled out the picture of Kit. I held it up for him to see. "Luke," I said, my voice steady and cold as the air conditioning. "Meet the real Juliet Collins." Luke looked at the photo. He looked at the dark hair, the dark eyes, the unmistakable Collins sneer even in a smile. "Holy hell," Luke breathed. "She looks just like Evan." "Richard wants a public trial," I said, staring at the photo. "He wants to prove I don't belong. Well, I am going to introduce him to the person who does, and it is going to break him." "We are going to Ohio," Luke asked, starting the engine. "We are going to Ohio," I confirmed. "And then, we are going to a wedding." The drive to Ohio was an exercise in calculated anxiety, while Luke drove through the endless stretches of highway. I sat in the passenger seat, drafting a message on my phone. I had written and deleted the text so many times that my thumbs were cramping. How do you tell a stranger that her entire existence is a clerical error? How do you tell someone that the parents who raised her are not the ones who share her blood? I did not want to sound like a scammer. I did not want to sound like a lunatic. Finally, somewhere outside of Columbus, I settled on honesty. It was the only weapon I had left that Richard could not buy. "Hi, Kit. My name is Juliet Collins. We have never met, but I believe we were born at the same hospital, Harbor Light Women's, on November 12th, 1996. I know this sounds insane, but I have evidence that there was a mistake made in the nursery that night, a mistake involving our wristbands. I am not asking for money. I am just asking you to look at a picture of my brother, Evan. If you see what I see, please call me." I attached a photo of Evan from the yacht club party, looking dark and brooding in his tuxedo. Then, I hit send. The 3 dots of a typing indicator did not appear for a long time. An hour passed. Then 2. The silence was heavier than the humid air outside. I began to wonder if she had blocked me, or if she was laughing at the crazy girl from the internet. Then, my phone buzzed. I have been told my whole life that I must be the milkman's kid. The text read, "My parents are redheads. I am not. I always thought it was a joke." I let out a breath that rattled in my chest. She knew. Deep down, she had always known. It is a specific kind of loneliness. Growing up in a house where you don't match the furniture. I texted back. "It wasn't a joke. It was a switch. I have the nursing logs. I have the witness. And I have a DNA test that proves I am not a Collins, which means you are." This time, the response was immediate. "Can we FaceTime?" I pulled down the visor mirror and checked my face. I looked exhausted, pale, and terrified. I looked like a woman who was about to burn down her own life. I accepted the call, the screen filled with a face that made my heart stop. It was not like looking in a mirror. It was like looking at a ghost of the family I was supposed to have. Kit Hale had the Collins jawline sharp, aristocratic, and stubborn. She had the dark, heavy-lidded eyes that Richard used to intimidate boardrooms. She even had the same slight furrow in her brow that Evan got when he was thinking. She was sitting in what looked like a small apartment kitchen, wearing a vintage t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She stared at me, and I stared at her. We were strangers, yet we were the most intimate people on earth. We were the variables in an equation that had finally been solved. "You are blonde," she said. Her voice was deeper than mine, raspy. "My mother, my biological mother, Mrs. Hale, has blonde hair," I asked. Kit nodded slowly. "Strawberry blonde, and blue eyes, just like you." She leaned closer to the camera. "I saw the picture of your brother, Evan. I looked at it and, God, it was like looking at a male version of myself. It freaked me out." "It should," I said. "He is your brother, Kit, your biological brother." "And the man?" she asked. "The father, Richard Collins," I said. "He is a complicated man." "Rich?" she asked, picking up on the name. "Very," I said, "and very concerned with legacy, which is why we need to do this right. I need you to take a test, Clear Helix, the same lab I used, It is legally admissible. I will pay for it. I will overnight the kit to you. Kit went silent. She looked down at her hands. If this is true, it means my parents, the people who raised me. They are still your parents, I said fiercely. They raised you. They loved you. Biology doesn't erase that. But Richard Collins has spent 28 years punishing me for not being you. And he has spent 28 years mourning a daughter he didn't know he had. We need to set the record straight. I am not doing this for him, Kit said. Her eyes hardening. It was a look I had seen on Richard 1,000 times. I am doing it because I am tired of feeling like an alien in my own life. Good, I said. Because I am planning a party, and I want you to be the guest of honor. While the DNA kit was winging its way to Ohio, the war on the home front was shifting from emotional to tactical. I had returned to Richmond, turning my apartment into a command center. Luke was handling Denise, coordinating with Marcus Thorne to get her affidavit notarized and her legal protections in place. I was handling the stage. Margot was the architect. My grandmother had listened to the plan without blinking. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't plead for family unity. She simply asked, "How big do you want the explosion to be?" "Nuclear," I had replied. So, Margot did what Sinclair women do best. She threw a party. She booked the Sinclair Gardens estate, a sprawling property that had been in her family for generations. It was neutral ground, not Richard's house, not his club. It was her territory. She sent out invitations for an emergency engagement celebration, a title vague enough to intrigue but formal enough to demand attendance. And then, she did the masterstroke. She invited the exact list of people Richard had copied on his mass email. The board members, the cousins, the pastor, the rivals. By inviting the very audience Richard had tried to turn against me, she forced his hand, if he didn't show up. He looked weak. If he did show up, he was walking into a trap, but Richard was not idle. 2 days before the party, I received a notification from the bank. My credit card was declined at the grocery store. I logged into my accounts. The balances were 0. Then, an email from the family lawyer, the same one who had drafted the prenup. It was a formal notice that Richard was activating the non-paternity clause of the Collins Family Trust. He was petitioning to have all assets previously allocated to me, including the funds for the wedding and the down payment on our house, transferred immediately to the primary beneficiary, Evan Collins. He was freezing me out. He was trying to starve me into submission. Luke saw the screen over my shoulder. He emptied the joint account. He is trying to squeeze, I said, closing the laptop. He thinks if he cuts off the money, I will be too busy scrambling for rent to fight him. He thinks this is about financial survival. Is it? Luke asked. We can cover the rent, Jules, but the wedding deposits the vendors. Let them bounce, I said coldly. I don't care about the flowers. I don't care about the cake. Richard is playing checkers. He is moving pieces around to protect his wallet. He doesn't realize we are playing chess. And I am coming for his king. I picked up my phone and called the lawyer. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten to sue. I simply said, "Please inform Mr. Collins that I have received his notice. Tell him I understand his position and I will address all financial matters at the engagement party at Sinclair Gardens." It was a bluff. It made it sound like I was coming to beg. It made it sound like I was coming to negotiate a settlement. It would make him feel safe. That evening, Evan called. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Evan calling, my brother, the boy I had protected from bullies on the playground, the boy who had watched me drown at the dinner table for 2 decades and never thrown a rope. "Hello, Evan," I said. "You have to stop this," Evan said. His voice was ragged, tight with stress. "Mom is a wreck. Dad is on a warpath. He is talking about writing you out of the will completely. Jules, he is talking about erasing you." "He erased me 28 years ago," I said. "I am just filling in the blanks." "Why are you doing this?" Evan shouted. "Why can't you just walk away? You got the results. You are not his. Fine. Go live your life with Luke. Why do you have to drag everyone to Grandma's estate? You are destroying this family." "I am not destroying anything," I said, my voice calm, contrasting his panic. "I am cleaning up the mess. You are all so used to the smell of Richard's lies that you think it is fresh air. I am just opening a window." "There is no window," Evan snapped. "There is just shame. You are going to humiliate Mom. You are going to humiliate yourself." "Is that what you are worried about?" I asked. "Or are you worried that when the truth comes out, you won't be the golden child anymore? Are you worried about what happens when you are not the only heir?" Silence. "You don't know what you are talking about," Evan whispered. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "See you at the party. Evan, wear something nice. You are going to meet someone special." I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. The final pieces fell into place on Friday morning. Clear Helix delivered the rush results comparing Kit Hale's sample to the profile they had on file for Richard and Stephanie. I didn't open the PDF. I didn't need to read it. I forwarded it directly to a secure printer at the estate. I wanted the seal to be broken in the room. Then, I confirmed with Kit. She was driving down from Ohio. She had refused to fly. She said she needed the time to think. We spoke on the phone one last time before she crossed the state line. "I have a condition," Kit said. She sounded tired. "Name it." "I am not a prop," she said. "I am not going to jump out of a cake. I am not going to be paraded around like a prize pony. If I walk into that room, I want to be introduced as a person. I want to meet them, my parents, with dignity. If you turn this into a circus, I will turn around and drive back to Dayton." "No circus," I promised. "Just the truth. You will be in the library. When the time is right, I will bring you out. You speak when you want to speak." "Okay," she said. "I'm trusting you. Juliet, don't make me regret it." Then came Denise. She met us at the lawyer's office to sign the affidavit. She looked small in the leather chair, clutching her purse. Marcus Thorne had drafted a document that detailed the night of November 12th, the switch, the cover-up, and the pressure from the administration. "I will come to the house," Denise said, her voice trembling. "But I won't go in alone, and I want Mr. Thorne standing right next to me." "I will be there," Marcus said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "If anyone tries to intimidate you, Richard Collins, the hospital lawyers, anyone, I will step in. You are a whistleblower now. Ms. Kearney, you have protections." "I don't care about protections," Denise said, looking at me. "I just don't want to die with this secret in my throat. I want to sleep. For the first time in 30 years, I want to sleep." "You will," I said. "After tomorrow night, everything changes." I drove to Sinclair Gardens alone that evening. The estate was lit up, the gardens manicured, the staff preparing for the arrival of 60 guests. It looked beautiful. It looked like the setting for a fairy tale. But as I walked through the empty ballroom, checking the projector screen I had set up in the corner, I knew it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a courtroom. I stood at the podium where I would stand tomorrow. I looked out at the empty chairs. I imagined Richard in the front row, smug and victorious. I imagined Stephanie, terrified and shrinking. I imagined Evan, conflicted and weak. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope containing the birth records, the nursing logs, and the unopened DNA results for Kit. "Checkmate," I whispered to the empty room. The preparations were complete. The guests were invited. The evidence was secured. The witnesses were en route. Richard Collins thought he had discarded a daughter. He was about to find out that he had actually summoned a prosecutor. The air in the ballroom of the Sinclair Gardens estate was not festive. It was electric. Charged with the static of 60 people waiting for a public execution, Margot had outdone herself. The room was a masterpiece of old Virginia elegance crystal chandeliers, heavy velvet drapes, and arrangements of white roses that looked almost funereal in their perfection. But the atmosphere was pure Roman Colosseum. The guests had arrived promptly at 7. These were not just friends. They were the recipients of Richard's mass email. They were the board members who controlled the future of the Collins group, the cousins who had always envied Evan's inheritance, and the social climbers who fed on scandal like vampires feed on blood. They held their champagne flutes like weapons, their eyes darting around the room, whispering behind manicured hands. They were here to see the affair child beg for forgiveness. They were here to watch Richard Collins cut me out of the family tree with a surgical knife. I stood near the projector screen I had set up in the corner. To the casual observer, it looked like a standard engagement party setup, a slideshow of childhood photos, a sentimental journey through the years. I had even loaded the first slide a picture of me at 5 years old, sitting on a pony, smiling obliviously, but underneath that file, in a folder simply marked "The Truth," sat the scans of the nursing logs, the affidavit from Denise, and the side-by-side DNA results that would turn this room into a crater. Luke stood beside me, his hand resting on the small of my back. His touch was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. He was wearing a dark suit that we had bought yesterday, and he looked like a guardian. He could feel the tremors running through my spine. "Breathe," Luke whispered, leaning close to my ear so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. "You are tight as a drum string." "I just want it to start," I murmured, scanning the crowd. "I want to wipe that look off their faces." "Remember what we talked about," Luke said, his voice low and steady. "You are not doing this out of rage. Anger is messy. Anger makes mistakes. You are doing this for order. You are restoring the balance. Do not let him bait you into a screaming match." "Revenge by order," I repeated his mantra. Cold, clinical, final. I looked across the room at my mother. Stephanie Collins was standing near the bar, clutching a glass of sparkling water. For 28 years, I had watched this woman shrink under the weight of Richard's accusations. I had watched her tremble, apologize, and fade. But tonight, something was different. She was pale, yes, and her hands were shaking slightly, but she was standing straight. Her chin was up. She knew. She knew she hadn't cheated. The DNA result I had shown her, the 0% match, had terrified her, but it had also liberated her. She was no longer the adulterous wife. She was a victim of a theft. And for the first time in my life, she wasn't looking at Richard with fear. She was looking at the door, waiting for him, with a strange, tragic defiance. Evan was standing near the entrance, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He looked like he was about to be sick. He was the golden boy, the heir. But tonight, he looked fragile. He caught my eye across the room and quickly looked away, burying his nose in his drink. He knew something was coming, but he didn't have the courage to ask what it was. He was just hoping the blast radius wouldn't hit his trust fund. Then, the heavy oak doors opened. The conversation in the room died instantly. It was a physical silence, a vacuum created by the arrival of the king. Richard Collins walked in. He was late. Of course he was late. Power does not arrive on time. Power keeps people waiting. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than Luke's truck. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his face smooth and rested. He didn't look like a man who was about to disown his daughter. He looked like a man who had already won the lottery and was just here to collect the check. He paused at the top of the short staircase leading down into the ballroom, surveying his kingdom. He smiled that tight, shark-like smile that didn't reach his eyes. He nodded to a board member. He winked at a cousin. He radiated victory. He walked down the stairs, and Evan immediately fell into step beside him, like a nervous squire attending a knight. "Dad," Evan whispered, loud enough for me to hear from 10 feet away. "Maybe we should do this in private. The room is tense." Richard laughed. It was a booming, confident sound. "Nonsense. Evan, we are all family here, and family values honesty above all else." He walked straight past me. He didn't even look at me. It was a deliberate snub, a signal to the room that I was already invisible, already erased. He walked to the front of the room, where Margot was sitting in a high-backed velvet chair. My grandmother did not stand up. She sat with her hands folded over her cane, wearing a black dress that made her look like a Supreme Court justice. She stared at Richard with eyes that could cut glass. "Richard," Margot said. Her voice was ice. "You are late." "Fashionably so." "Margot," Richard said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. She pulled away slightly, leaving him to kiss the air. He didn't flinch. He just straightened his tie and turned to face the room. "Well," Richard said, clapping his hands together. "Shall we get started? I believe we have some business to attend to before we cut the cake." My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. I glanced toward the side door, the one that led to the library. Behind that door sat Kit Hale. I had checked on her 20 minutes ago. She was pacing the floor, twisting a ring on her finger. She had asked me, "What if they hate me? What if I walk out there and I am just the person who ruined their lives?" "You are not the ruin," I had told her. "You are the restoration." I looked toward the back of the room, into the shadows of the alcove. Denise Kearney was there, sitting next to Marcus Thorne. She was clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked terrified, but she hadn't run. She was holding the weight of 28 years in that bag, and she was finally ready to put it down. Richard signaled to the AV technician to cut the music. The string quartet faded into silence. "If I could have everyone's attention," Richard boomed. He didn't need a microphone, but he took the one offered to him anyway. He liked his voice amplified. The guests turned, 60 pairs of eyes fixed on him. "I know why you are all here," Richard began, his voice dropping to a confidential, serious register. "You received my email earlier this week. It was a difficult message to send. No father wants to admit that his family is flawed." He paused for effect. He looked at Stephanie. She stared back, her face unreadable. "For 28 years," Richard continued, "I have tried to be a good man. I have tried to raise a child who was not my own. I did it to protect my wife. I did it to protect the Collins name. But there comes a time when silence is no longer a kindness. It is a liability." He turned slowly, pivoting on his heel until he was finally facing me. "Juliet," he said. The spotlight seemed to swing toward me. I felt the heat of it. I felt the judgment of the room. "I asked you to come here tonight for a reason," Richard said. "I know you are angry about the trust fund. I know you are panicked about the wedding. But this is not about money. This is about integrity." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the printout of the DNA results, or rather, the first page of the results, the page that excluded him. "I am prepared to offer you a settlement," Richard said, holding the paper up like a verdict. "I will cover the costs of your wedding. I will provide a modest stipend to help you start your life. But in exchange, I need you to do something for me. Something you should have done years ago." He took a step toward me. "I want you to admit it," Richard said softly. "I want you to stand here, in front of God and your family, and admit that I was right. Admit that you are not a Collins. Admit that your mother lied to me, and admit that you have known it all along." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the projector fan. He was offering me a buyout. He was paying me to validate his decades of cruelty. He wanted me to take the money, brand my mother a cheater, and walk away so he could play the benevolent victim forever. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. I looked at Evan. He was staring at his shoes, unable to witness the slaughter. I looked at Luke. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "Order." I stepped away from the wall. I walked past the projector screen. I didn't look down. I walked until I was standing right next to Richard on the small riser. I was eye level with him. I could smell his expensive cologne. I could see the tiny veins in his eyes. "You want the truth, Richard?" I asked. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the silence of the room, it carried to the back corners. "I want you to be honest, Juliet," he said, smiling that condescending smile. "For once." "Okay," I said. "I will be honest." I turned to the crowd. I saw the hunger in their eyes. They thought I was about to crumble. They thought I was about to cry and take the check. My father is right about one thing, I said, my voice gaining strength. I am not a Collins. The DNA test proved that conclusively. 0% match. A ripple of whispers went through the room. Richard nodded, looking satisfied. He lowered the microphone slightly, thinking the battle was over. But, I continued, raising my voice to cut through the whispers, he is wrong about the rest. I turned back to Richard. The smile on his face faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, he saw something in my eyes that he hadn't expected. He didn't see surrender. He saw the cold, hard glint of a blade. You didn't read the whole report, did you, Richard? I asked. I read enough, he scoffed. It said excluded. It said I was excluded from being your daughter, I said. But if you had scrolled down to page 2, you would have seen the other result. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control for the projector. You asked for a confession, I said. You asked to clear the family name. You asked to expose the lie that has been rotting in this house for 28 years. I pressed the button. The screen behind me flared to life. It wasn't a photo of a pony. It was a high-resolution scan of the Clear Helix report. Subject Stephanie Collins. Relationship maternity. Result 0.00%. Excluded. The gasp that went through the room sucked the oxygen out of the air. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a collective shock. Richard turned around. He stared at the screen. He blinked. He squinted. What is this? He demanded, his voice losing its smooth polish. What kind of trick is this? It is not a trick, I said. It is the truth you asked for. Mom didn't cheat on you. Richard, she never stepped out. She gave birth to a baby girl on November 12th, 1996. But she didn't bring that baby home. I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. It was the nursing log. The jagged handwriting. The times circled in red. 2340 Hale. 2342 Collins. 2 minutes, I said into the silence. 2 little girls born 2 minutes apart. 1 nurse, 2 wristbands, and a hospital that was too terrified of a lawsuit to tell you the truth. Richard looked at the screen, then at me. His face was draining of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. This is insane. You are making this up. Am I? I signaled to the back of the room. Marcus, please. Marcus Thorne stood up. He guided Denise Kearney into the light. The guests parted for them like the Red Sea. Denise was trembling, but she walked with purpose. She stopped 10 feet from Richard. Hello, Mr. Collins, Denise said. Her voice was weak, but it was clear. I don't know if you remember me. I was the charge nurse that night. Richard stared at her. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not of her face, perhaps, but of the threat she represented. You, he whispered. We switched them, Denise said. It was an accident, but the cover-up wasn't. The administrator told us to keep quiet. He said you had made a contribution. He said the file was closed. Lies, Richard shouted. He looked around the room, desperate to regain control. This is a setup. She paid this woman. It is a fabrication to get the money. I don't want your money. Richard, I said calmly. I told you, I want order. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. Then, a single image appeared. It was the side-by-side DNA comparison I had received yesterday. Subject 1, Richard Collins. Subject 2, Catherine Hale. Result 99.99% inclusion. You wanted your daughter, I said to Richard, who was now staring at the screen with his mouth open, his arrogance completely shattered. You wanted someone with your eyes, someone with your blood, someone who wasn't a cuckoo in your nest. I looked at the library door. I nodded. The door opened. Kit Hale stepped out. She was wearing a simple navy dress. She looked terrified, but she walked into the room, and as she stepped into the light of the chandeliers, the resemblance hit the room like a physical wave. She had Richard's hair. She had Richard's nose. She had the exact same brooding, intense expression that Evan wore. Evan dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silence. "Oh my God," Stephanie whispered, bringing her hands to her mouth. Kit stopped in the middle of the room. She looked at Richard. Richard looked at Kit. For 28 years, he had been looking for himself in my face and hating me when he couldn't find it. Now, he was looking at a stranger, and he was seeing a mirror. "You said you wouldn't come to the wedding unless you had proof I belonged," I said to Richard. I stepped down from the riser and walked over to stand next to Kit. We stood side by side, the blonde stranger he had raised, and the dark-haired daughter he had abandoned. "Well, Richard," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "here is your proof. You were right. I don't belong to you." I pointed at Kit. "She does." The room didn't just whisper, it erupted, and in the center of the chaos, Richard Collins, the man who had never lost a negotiation in his life, fell to his knees, not in prayer, and not in apology. He fell because the ground he had built on lies had just opened up and swallowed him whole. The silence that followed Kit Hale's entrance was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. Richard was still on his knees, his expensive tuxedo pants pressing into the marble floor, his eyes darting frantically between the DNA report in his hand and the living, breathing woman standing 10 feet away from him. He scrambled to stand up, his composure cracking like a windshield hit by a stone. He clutched the paper, the one he had bullied Evan into forwarding, the one he thought was his ticket to freedom, and waved it in the air. His face was a mask of desperate denial. "This is a trick," he stammered, his voice rising to a pitch that cracked with panic. "You think you can parade a stranger in here and fool me? Look at the paper. The results say 0%, 0% for me, and 0% for Stephanie." He spun around, pointing a shaking finger at my mother. "You see what she is doing, Stephanie? She is trying to humiliate us. She is hiring actors because she cannot handle the truth that she is not one of us." My mother flinched, instinctively stepping back, but I did not let her retreat. I stepped forward, grabbing the microphone from the stand. My hand was steady. My heart was a block of ice. "You are half right, Dad," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, cutting through his hysteria. "I am not your biological daughter. We established that. But you are wrong about the most important thing. You are wrong about the crime." I pressed the button on the remote again. The screen shifted, highlighting the section of the nursing log I had circled in red. "Look at the screen. Richard," I commanded. "Don't look at me. Look at the evidence." He refused to turn. He was staring at Kit, his eyes wide, terrified by the recognition he could not suppress. "The log shows 2 births," I continued, narrating the destruction of his reality. 11:40 at night, Catherine Hale. 11:42 at night, Juliet Collins. 2 minutes, 1 nurse, 2 wristbands placed on the wrong wrists. I pointed to Denise, who was standing next to Marcus Thorne. She looked terrified, but she stepped forward into the spotlight. Her voice shook, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, everyone heard her. "It is true," Denise said. She looked directly at Richard, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake in the nursery. We tried to fix it the next morning, but the administration, they said it was too late. They said you had made a donation. They told us to change the logs." Richard froze. "Your wife never betrayed you," Denise said, her voice gaining strength, driven by 3 decades of guilt. "She never looked at another man. You have punished the wrong woman for 28 years. Richard looked at Stephanie. For the first time in my life, I saw the arrogance drain out of him. It didn't leave slowly. It poured out of him like water from a smashed vase. He looked at Stephanie, really looked at her, and realized that every insult, every cold shoulder, every accusation he had hurled at her since 1996 had been a lie. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He looked back at Kit. Kit had not moved. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, watching him with those dark, intense eyes, his eyes. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry, "Daddy." She looked at him with the cool detachment of a stranger analyzing a wreck. "You are her," Richard whispered. It was barely audible. "You are mine." "According to the test, yes," Kit said. Her voice was calm, contrasting the chaos around her. "But I have a father in Ohio who taught me how to ride a bike and how to treat people with respect. I am just here to make sure you stop hurting my sister." She gestured to me. The word hung in the air. Sister. Richard looked between us. The blonde daughter he had rejected, and the brunette daughter he had never known. The realization of what he had done, what he had thrown away, seemed to physically strike him. His knees buckled again, and this time, he didn't try to stand. He slumped onto the riser, a king sitting in the ashes of his own castle. The guests were whispering furiously now. The board members were checking their phones, likely texting their brokers or PR teams. The scandal was already leaking out of the room. But we weren't done. Stephanie walked out from the edge of the crowd. She walked past Evan, who was still staring at the shattered glass on the floor, paralyzed by his own cowardice. She walked past Margot, who nodded at her once, a silent salute. Stephanie stopped in front of Richard. She looked down at him. She didn't look like the woman who used to hide in the garden shed to cry. She looked like the matriarch she was always supposed to be. "Stand up," she said. Richard looked up. Dazed, he slowly got to his feet, swaying slightly. "Stephanie," he choked out. "I didn't know. The hospital, they lied." "The hospital lied about a baby," Stephanie said. Her voice was low, trembling with a fury so pure it felt hot. "But you lied about everything else. You lied every time you called me a whore. You lied every time you looked at our daughter and called her a mistake. You took a clerical error and you turned it into a weapon to torture me." "I thought I was right," Richard pleaded. "I thought I was protecting the family." "You destroyed the family," Stephanie shouted, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You chose suspicion over love. Every single day for 28 years. You had a choice, Richard. You could have loved Juliet anyway. You could have trusted me anyway. But you loved your ego more." She took a step closer to him. "I want one thing from you," she said. "Right now, in front of your partners, in front of your family, in front of the daughters you failed." "Anything," Richard whispered. He looked small. He looked old. "Apologize," Stephanie demanded. "Not for the mistake, for the cruelty. Admit that you were wrong to doubt me. Admit that you broke us." Richard looked around the room. He saw the faces of the people he had tried to impress for decades. He saw the judgment in their eyes. He realized that his reputation was gone, not because of a scandal, but because of his reaction to it. He looked at me. He looked at Kit. And finally, he looked at his wife. "I was wrong," Richard said. "Richard." His voice cracked. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about Juliet. I let my pride, I let it rot everything." He covered his face with his hands. "I am sorry." It was the surrender I had waited a lifetime to hear, but as I watched him weep, I realized something strange. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt relief. The monster under the bed wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a sad, broken man. I signaled to Luke. He killed the projector. The image of the DNA results faded to black, but the truth was burned into everyone's retinas. The party ended not with a toast, but with an exodus. The guests filtered out in stunned silence, leaving the five of us, me, Kit, Evan, Stephanie, and Richard standing in the wreckage of the Collins legacy. But the story didn't end in the ballroom. In the weeks that followed, the silence of the Sinclair estate was replaced by the noise of litigation. My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, didn't just file a complaint, he launched a crusade. With Denise's affidavit and the DNA results as the spearhead, we pierced the veil of the hospital's special archive. The discovery process was brutal. We found the email chains from 1996. We found the internal memos discussing the risk of catastrophic reputational damage. We found the wire transfer records connecting Richard's charitable donation to the exact week the nursing logs were altered. It turned out, Richard hadn't known about the switch specifically. He hadn't known he was swapping babies, but the record showed he had been informed of a potential identification anomaly and had instructed his lawyers to ensure the matter is resolved without publicity. He had paid for silence without asking what the silence was covering. His indifference was just as damning as malice. The hospital settled out of court for a sum that made the headlines. They issued a formal apology and overhauled their entire identification protocol, naming the new system after the two families they had destroyed the Hale Collins protocol. Kit went back to Ohio, but she didn't disappear. We talked every day. She was slowly getting to know Stephanie, building a bridge over 3 decades of lost time. She wasn't ready to call them Mom and Dad, and she certainly wasn't ready to forgive Richard, but she was part of the story now, and Richard. He didn't fight the lawsuit. He didn't fight the divorce, either. When Stephanie finally filed it, he moved out of the Briarcliff estate and into a condo in the city. He resigned as CEO of the Collins Group, handing the reins to a board of directors because Evan, to his credit, refused to take the job until he had earned it. 6 weeks later, the day of my wedding finally arrived. The sun was shining over Richmond, a stark contrast to the storm that had started this journey. The church was full, not with the social climbers Richard had wanted to impress, but with the people who actually mattered. I stood in the vestibule, wearing white. My heart was calm. "Ready?" a voice asked. I turned. Stephanie Collins was standing there. She looked radiant in a blue dress that matched my eyes, her eyes. "Ready," I said. Traditionally, the father walks the bride down the aisle. It is a symbol of transferring property, of giving the woman away. We were not doing tradition today. Stephanie linked her arm through mine. "I am not giving you away," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "I just got you back." The doors opened. The organ music swelled. We walked down the aisle together. I saw Luke waiting at the altar, his eyes shining. I saw Kit sitting in the front pew on the bride's side, smiling, her red-headed parents from Ohio sitting next to her, holding hands with Margot. And then, I saw him. Richard was sitting in the second row on the groom's side. He looked older, grayer. He wasn't the center of attention. He wasn't the patriarch. He was just a guest. When I passed him, he looked up. His eyes met mine. There was shame there, deep and permanent. But there was also a flicker of gratitude that he had been allowed to come at all. I didn't smile at him. I didn't nod. I just kept walking. I wasn't the affair child anymore. I wasn't the mistake. I was Juliet. I was the daughter of a woman who had walked through fire to find me, and the sister of a woman who had helped me burn down the lies. As I reached the altar and took Luke's hand, I realized that Richard was right about one thing all those years ago. Biology is powerful, but as I looked at my mother and my sister and the man I was about to marry, I knew the truth. Biology makes you relatives, but it is the truth that makes you family. And for the first time in 28 years, the Collins family was finally, truly, clean. Thank you so much for listening to this story of truth and redemption. I would love to hear your thoughts. Where are you tuning in from today? And what would you have done if you were in Juliet's shoes? Please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.